Hey guys, it's Cam for Investors Underground. It really is my pleasure today to get to sit down with a member of the Investors Underground community who's really been making moves on the long side recently with some of his bold positions and size on a number of beat up charts. We've got a real decent chunk of time blocked out to go deep into some of his thoughts on strategy, timing, psychology, and other topics that we sometimes don't get a chance to go over in some of our shorter interviews with IU members. I've been looking forward to this interview for a long while now. A big welcome to Paso, aka P_Mill.
Great, I'm excited.
So for the people who are being introduced to you for the first time, let us know a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so my name is Paso, P_Mill in chat. I live in Dallas, Texas. I just turned 29. I've been trading for about 4 or 5 years now, and I joined the community within a couple of months of starting. So I've been with IU for a while now.
Nice. I've always been meaning to visit Texas. Were you born and raised there?
No, actually, I moved here from Bosnia when I was about 5, 6 years old. I don't know how much you guys know about history of the Yugoslavia, but a war broke out basically in the early 90s, and my parents were forced to flee the country. So we came here as refugees. A lot of bad stuff was happening, so we were pretty lucky to get out when we did. And so I've been here for ever since I was a little kid. Started school here. I'm almost a citizen, so going through the naturalization process right now.
Very cool. I can't detect much of an accent on you. Did you learn English while you were in Bosnia, or?
I learned everything here. I was pretty young when I came to the United States. I've got a couple of siblings, and they have an accent. I don't think I do. People will generally ask, "Oh, where are you from?" When I tell them my name and I say Bosnia, and they're like puzzled, like, "Where's that?" I'm like, so I've got to give them a little bit of a background to where Bosnia is and kind of the history behind it, but no accent, and yeah, English is not my first language.
So tell us a little bit about when you were first introduced to the concept of trading.
So, as an immigrant, your parents are generally pushing you to either be a doctor or lawyer because that's all they know. That's stability to them. So through college, my plan was to go to law school, and was an undergrad at University of Missouri in Columbia, Mizzou, and taking pre-law and kind of doing prepping myself for law school, and got to law school, and within the first semester, I was like, this isn't for me. Like, it was absolutely dreadful, boring stuff I wasn't really interested in. So I dropped out and I got a job at it was a startup pharmaceutical company. The ticker symbol is SUPN, Supernus Pharmaceuticals. And so it was just kind of getting off the ground. At the time, I didn't really know, much about the market or, anything really except than taking one finance class in college. Anyway, so we got an equity piece in like a stock options package, which I never paid attention to. My main focus was how much money am I going to make? What are my commission structure going to be like, and things of that nature. So, a couple years had passed, and this we had this big, celebration at the company. It was like, we'd crossed $1 billion market cap or whatever I don't really recall, but everybody was all pumped up about it, and I didn't really know what it means. And my manager was like, well, it means the value of the company's gone up, your stock and all this stuff. And I was like, well, I don't really know anything about that. And, um, you know, when I started working at the pharmaceutical company, I was living at home, ended up moving out. So all the mail went to my parents' house. So I never opened up a letter from Fidelity regarding the stock options piece until, I went home and actually found one. And I saw this chunk of cash there. I'm like, well, what the hell is this? Like, how did I get this? And I realized that, in a couple of years, I'd made more money in stock than I did, working at the company as a sales rep, salary and bonus included. So I was like, can I cash out, or can I take this money? And figured out this is what I wanted to do with my life at the time. And that's how I found the market through that job. So I ended up quitting, and not soon after, and thought I was just gonna start trading and make a bunch of money right after that, which didn't last very long.
Right. I'm curious as to what your parents' opinion of all that was.
So my parents have no idea what the stock market is. I mean, they really don't understand the concept of it. My parents are high school education, especially coming as immigrants, all they're focused on is get a nice steady job that pays you a paycheck, you get insurance, health insurance. That was their, primary concern for me and what they wanted me to do. So when I told them I was going to quit and do this for a living, they were just, shocked. And it was already a disaster me quitting law school, and we were still on edge there. And now it was like, well, I'm going to quit this job because I was doing relatively well, and now I'm telling them I'm going to quit this job and go out and trade stocks. And I guess it was scary for them. And our families are relatively close together. You're very bonded because you're in this foreign land and you don't really know much about it. And ever since I was a little kid, I saw my parents struggle with money, and it was always an issue. And we have these bills and this, and you can never make ends meet. And my mom was working, like she was cleaning houses during the day, and then she would come home and then she would work at this sewing factory. I mean, she had 2 or 3 jobs. My dad was always on the road. He drove a semi truck. So it was, they worked extremely hard, but it was very difficult to make ends meet and to make money. So just seeing them struggle as a kid, I've always said to myself, like, I'm whatever it is that I'm going to do when I grow up, my main focus is making money. And that's kind of why I wanted to go to law school. And attorneys are supposed to be paid generally well, and the sales job was okay, but it just, by luck and by me finding the markets through that job, figuring out and seeing the opportunity to be able to take care of my family and make sure they were okay, because they're always living this sense of fears. You're going to lose everything, you're going to lose everything, because they did go through that. When the war broke out, they lost everything. You lost your home, your land, any trucks, cars, whatever you had to forfeit all of it and leave it. So it was extremely scary for them. So just going back to my main driver was, I always wanted to make money. And when I discovered the markets, I was hooked instantly. So that's kind of how I started to find my way.
It seems like a bit of a catch-22 for some of these companies offering stock options, because if everyone works really hard and the share price goes up, I imagine it becomes harder and harder for employees to get up in the morning and go to work when they've got a ton of options sitting in their account waiting to convert to cash.
Well, I imagine so. I mean, again, over time, I never paid attention to it, so I never really knew until we had hit this milestone. So I had no idea what was going on, but I was like the first wave of 40 reps that was hired. So we were generally given more stock early on, and the stock went from like $4 or $6 relatively quickly into the 20s, and then it doubled again. So as the value of the company started to go up, they were giving out less and less stock. So I could assume that yes, people would leave or wouldn't be incentivized to work. But I guess for me, it was kind of the right place, right time scenario where I did get in early. I didn't touch any of it until later on, so it all worked out in my favor.
So you've got a bunch of money and you're ready to trade and become a millionaire. What happened next?
So after I quit my job, I'd gone into it thinking, okay, I've got a nice chunk of money. I could go out and, I could replicate this process of buying low, finding companies that were cheap and selling them at a higher price. Simple, right? Well, quickly I realized that was not the case. I'd quit my job, so I was solely focused on this, but there was no more money coming in, and I was losing a lot. I'd joined a room initially, and it just wasn't fitting. I mean, there was a lot of stuff happening. I didn't really think I was getting any help. I would ask questions, and I wouldn't get a response. And when you're new, I mean, it's such a challenge, and you're like a deer in the headlights. Like, you have no idea what's going on, and you just feel so lost. And I was like lone wolfing it. Like even then, I was a little hesitant to ask questions, and when you did, it just felt like nobody really cared. And a month later, or a month after I got into this room, I had left, and I discovered Nate on Twitter. I was searching like one of the stocks I was in, and I saw Nate posting something about it. So I clicked on his page, and it had a direct link to Investors Underground, and I joined, and it was just a completely different dynamic. There's guys going long, short. There's game plans written out. I mean, in the morning pre-market, guys were calling out, hey, this is what I'm looking for, long, short, like this level, and I was like, shit, this is awesome, like. And the biggest thing for me was up until that point, I wasn't really getting any questions answered. I was still so new to this. Yeah, I remember was so hesitant to ask Nate a question, and he would always respond, and it meant a lot, when you're new and somebody's saying, hey, like, this is what I think, and it was like, whoa, somebody actually is like gives a shit or actually cares about what I'm doing. So that, I've been in IU ever since then. Besides that, I did struggle. I was trading all kinds of stocks, chasing mostly stuff was gapping up. I would chase, and I would get slammed on. It was mostly junk stocks, just the typical stuff you see now, like some piece of shit company running, and me jumping in, and just getting, it would just roll over on me, and I'm taking a loss. And day after day, I mean, it seemed like a challenge to make $100. I remember my first winning trade was $82. And up until then, I think I'd lost like 5 grand. Like, it was ridiculous. And I'm like, how is this so hard? So plus I had the stress of, my family, and I was out of work. Like, all the money I had was used in trading, and I wasn't making anything. And then, around 2014, at the end of 2014, my dad suffered like a massive stroke, like complete paralysis. I couldn't walk, couldn't talk. I mean, it was terrible. And then 2 months later, my mom almost broke her neck, just got rear-ended by some guy flying off the highway. And both of my parents were out of work. And now it was up to me to take care of my family, and I was still pretty young then. I'd only been out of school for a year or two. And here I am, no job, trying to trade, losing every single day. I mean, it was really tough. The period with my dad was probably the one of the most challenging things I've ever been through in my entire life. Day in and day out, given like the circumstances of the situation I was in, was just, man, it just made you want to crawl in a hole and die. Like, it was such a challenging period in my life. But I had to go back, leave trading, not full time, but I had to go back and get a job. I had to go back and go to sales again to get some money coming in. So I was trading part time, just in the morning. So luckily I was doing sales again. So I had the flexibility of being able to trade in the morning. Then I would go out to work, come back and try to catch, a couple of hours like of the day. I remember that in itself was a challenge, but I had to do anything I could to make it work. So that's kind of where I got introduced to swing trading a little bit. And, I was still slowly starting to pick up, but I was still struggling to find some consistency. So I did that for another, I would say, about 2 years, and where I was trading part time and working until I finally started to get some consistency. So it's been a rocky road for sure, but yeah, that's where I am now.
So, casting your mind back to when you first started trading, tell us a bit about what you think you were doing wrong and how you fixed some of that.
Sure. So early on, like I said, I was chasing stuff that was running, and most of the time I was trading against like the guys who are doing exceptionally well in the room, Nate, Eric, D4. These things would be running up, and I'm trying to buy, and they're shorting, and I didn't really understand what I was doing wrong. I was still making mistakes, buying things that were running up, and then it would slam and I would sell. So you're buying high and selling low, like totally opposite, obviously, of what you should be doing. So then, as I'd mentioned, I was working part time. I was looking for a swing trading strategy, or something that I would be able to make money on, not so much as in like day trading. So I got introduced to swinging stuff off the bottom. For some reason, I think it's because I had got this equity piece from this company that was like $4 or $5 or whatever. It went from that to in the 30s, and so I was always looking for oversold stocks that could go up from where they were at massively. So one of the first big breakthroughs I had was I swung Jivo back, I think it was 2016, maybe it was the summer of 16, where I think it had like 2 gap downs, like washed out to like 25 pennies. And I ended up picking up like 100,000 shares. And it had gone to like, it had doubled, went to 40 and then 60. And then one night it gapped in the afternoon. They put out some PR that they're fuel was going to be used on a test run on Alaska Airlines. So the thing gapped to like $1.70 the next day, $1.90 pre-market. And I was like, it was $100,000. I was like, holy shit, like this is insane. Cause I'd struggled to make like 5-10 grand consistently. And I had this huge win. And that was my first big breakthrough on the swing trading side. I couldn't sell like at the time I was with TD Ameritrade. So the pre-market doesn't open, I think, till about 6 a.m. And I couldn't sell. So I was watching this thing ride back down to like $1.60, $1.50. And finally, like pre-market trading opened up on TD Ameritrade's platform. And, I dumped my entire position. And that was like my first big breakthrough on the swing side. And, that kind of helped give me some confidence. And I'm still to this day, I swing trades off the bottom. It's a little bit different now where I'm looking for large caps only. I've got burned so many times on buying these junk stocks, or like, a filing comes out or an offering or whatever the news is. So I no longer trade, or I haven't in a couple of years now. Haven't been trading any small cap or micro cap stocks. Generally, it's companies that have been oversold, bad news or earnings. I love stuff off the bottom, like anything breaking down 52-week lows. I'm really looking for that for a swing. But that's kind of how I developed my swing trading strategy. And on the day trading side, as in those 2 years, I was slowly starting to get some consistency. And instead of, as I mentioned, I was always buying stuff that was gapping up. It had gapped into resistance, and I was chasing that. And more oftentimes than not, those things would fail and ended up rolling over. So I started to buy gap down. So I was like, these guys are always shorting stocks that gap up. Why not buy stuff that's gapping down into support? And yeah, it took some time to kind of figure out a system to do that. Multiple trades and multiple losses until I finally figured out a process in taking these. And generally, these companies, whether it's Macy's or JD or just more recently, they're not going to go to zero. I mean, it would have to be something catastrophic for them to get completely annihilated. So I'm looking for the selling to get exhausted, then to get in and looking for that quick reversal. So I love the gap downs on the day trading side, just kind of let it wash out base and come back. And that's kind of where, I have a set risk, and that's basically what I look for on the day trading side.
So when you quit your job and started originally, you went full-time right off the bat for a little while. Then you were saying you went back to work for a couple of years and were trading part-time. How long have you been trading full-time now? And tell us a little bit about the decision and the process that you went through to transition from part-time trading back into full-time trading.
So I've been full-time for a little over 2 years now. Jivo, my big win on the swing side, was like the first catalyst to kind of help push me back into that. I was getting some consistency on the day trading side, and that was my big focus. I would have 2 to 5K days, 2 to 5K, 2 to 5K, and then I would take a big hit, like 10 or 15, and would wipe out, a week or 2 weeks of work. So I was still struggling on the day trading side, but the swings still seemed to we're picking up some more consistency. So I was looking to get more consistent on the day trading side before I totally left my job again. And again, I didn't want to go through the same situation again with leaving my job and having to go back to work. But leaving day trading and having to get a job it sucked. And I didn't want to go back and do it again. So I wanted to make sure, I was fully okay and consistent enough on the day trading side to be able to make money or pull money out of the market. If not every day, if I was at least, green on the week, or if I was getting some consistency and not taking these big losses to kind of wipe out a couple weeks worth of work. So over time, I think it's just, you just need time, and anybody starting out knows, and it doesn't happen overnight. And, it's, and I still struggle, everybody does. And I just felt like at a certain point, I was okay financially, where, I didn't necessarily need to work for another 2 years if I didn't have a paycheck coming in, and I was getting some consistency on the day trading side. So once I got there, I left, and it's been, a little over 2 years now where I've been trading full time.
So when was it that you felt like you could make trading a real career for yourself?
I think from day one, I always had this I think the market just grabbed a hold of me from that first big win. And again, going back to my early childhood, making money was my first priority, and making a lot of money was kind of the goal, and I discovered this in the markets and saw the potential. So I, said, this is what I'm going to do. And I've never once said, this isn't something that I wouldn't be able to do. It's just the time and putting in years of effort and struggle and falling down, 100 times and getting back 101 is, I've never once said to myself, this isn't something I could do. It's just, I struggled so much. And, like anybody starting out, but I always, from day one, I was like, this is what I'm going to do. I just fell in love with the markets. I fell in love with the idea of it. Still to this day, like getting up and going in the morning, even when I leave and I come back home, I just love coming back to my office and sitting in my chair and, being surrounded by the computers and the monitors and the bell ringing in the morning. It's just, there isn't anything better, So I think it's just the passion for the markets developed at a very early point, and I'd never walked away. And I've always said to myself, like, this is what I'm going to do no matter what. So I don't think there was a point in time where I said, now I can do this for a living. I always said, this is what I'm going to do, and I'll find a way to make it happen. And there's, a lot of struggles, a lot of ups and downs, but I'd never once, backed away and said, no, like this isn't, this isn't for me. And my mom had asked me, we had this conversation before, and, she knows how much I had struggled and how frustrated, I get sometimes. And, I was like, if I had $100 million tomorrow, I mean, I would do the exact same thing. Nothing would change. I mean, maybe a couple of material things, but as far as my day to day, absolutely nothing would change. So, not a lot of people can say that. And I think, the guys that are really involved in the markets and, that do this for a living, they're really passionate. They're really obsessed over it. And I think that's what it takes. So it's always stuck with me. And I've never once considered anything other than that after I found it.
So talk us through your process for creating a watch list and scanning for stocks.
So I typically am scanning aftermarket, when things kind of settle out. I usually take a nap after the market closes, let things kind of do the thing, the news or whatever the case may be. If it's bad earnings or if it's a news driven play, typically by 6, 7 o'clock, all this stuff has happened. So I'll jump on my computer again and I'll scan the markets after close and start to look for, for news and seeing what happened after. And that's when I do my initial scan for the next day, is the night before. And, I'll prep through, I'll go through the news and kind of do a quick overview of the company. And like I said, it's never micro caps or any small cap. Generally, it's large cap. So I'm looking through just quick peek of the financials, make sure it's not anything too bad, assess the news and go through the chart and really find, past gap downs, how it's acted before, where it's coming into, like what are the key levels. And, I'll mark all that stuff. I'll take notes. I write everything down. Like I've got a legal pad and I just kind of write out a quick plan. And I'll limit to two to three stocks max. And I like to just focus in on those. I have my one top pick and then my two secondary. And, as I go into the next morning, you're seeing how it's acting in pre-market and what it's doing. And I'm generally looking for a steady sell into open and then kind of like a big washout, let it base and come back. I'm just looking for like sellers to get exhausted, try to find some sort of support and, take my trade from there.
So tell us a little bit more about identifying the stocks that you're looking to trade. How do you go about entering an initial position? And then also a little bit about scaling.
Yeah. So as I mentioned the night before, I'll kind of go through and I'll draw all my key levels out. And I think this has helped me the most over the years, is kind of getting some consistency, is finding where the key support and resistance is. I use VWAP, but that's about it. And, I'm just looking at level 2 and the price action to dictate, the momentum shift in the stock. And I go through and I'll zoom out on my intraday chart, like if it's a month to the last gap down or whatever happened, and I'll try to figure out where the support resistance is. And if it breaks below a certain point, I know to avoid, or if it holds here, then I can start buying. And so I have my levels mapped out before I even get into the trade. Where I've gotten in trouble in the past is, jumping in too early. And I'm trading obviously bigger size now over the years, but if I want to get to 20 or 30,000 shares, and I would jump in with like 5,000 share position on a 20 or $30 stock, and that has gotten me in some pretty deep holes, and I've been lucky and bailed out. Other times, you end up really getting hurt on some of those. So I've taken my starters way down, like cut them by half. I'll put 20 or 50 grand, 2 or 3,000 shares. I'll add in if I'm right. I'll double up. If trend holds, I'll double up again. And this is something I talked to with Eric a lot about, and he's kind of like the master artist at this. And scaling is definitely a challenge, when you're trying to build a position out, and you don't want to ruin your average, but when things start moving in your favor, you really want to press it. So I think for me, the biggest change I'd made was really taking my starters down, like waiting for it to bottom out. And then, I'm okay with jumping in with a couple thousand shares. And I know even if it goes red against me, I mean, there's really, whether it's a indicator or a certain price point, no one really knows where the stock is going to turn. So you got to kind of get your feet in there and see, how the stock's going to act. I like jumping in just to get my attention. And when things really start to set up, I'm really focused in on that one or two trades. But earlier this year, I got probably one of my biggest day trading debacles turned luck was ACXM, and they ended up getting bought out, but it had gapped down from like, I think in the 30s to 24. It was washing out perfectly how I would hope it would set up pre-market. So making new lows, steady lows in the open, and it opened, washed out, and I think it broke below 25. So I was kind of planning on that 22.50, 20 range. So I started buying in at 24 for some reason, doubled up at 22s, went to 20, doubled up again, and before you know it, I had like 40,000 shares, man, and this thing broke below 20, and it was like 18 in like minutes, and I was down like 100 grand within the first 30 minutes of open. And that was the first big day trading loss. I hadn't realized it yet, but that was like the first big hit that I, would have taken at the time. I mean, I was completely blindsided. I mean, couldn't see. Like it was really scary. I mean, I'd taken losses close to that range, but it was more swing trading stuff, and to lose that X amount of money in one day, I mean, it caught me out of nowhere, and it was just my bad rules. I didn't respect my stop. I didn't have a plan in that. Everything was working so well, and then, things were coming back so quickly, or would eventually bounce back, that, I just kept going in, kept adding, and I was in a pretty big hole. I mean, I'd walked away from my screen. I'd called my mom. I didn't tell her anything. I was just like wanted to talk to somebody, like a calming presence, and just seeing what she was up to. And I walked back, and I was like, okay, like let's figure this out. And I had no choice, and I doubled up again. And I think I'd at one point, man, 60, 70,000 shares, and I was still down, a little north of 100 grand, and then it just squeezed straight back up through VWAP, monster volume, pushed again, and I ended up making money on the trade, which is just absolutely mind blowing from being down that much. I think I walked with like 20 or 30 grand, but had I waited, had I respected my rules, had I wait for this thing to set up, and had I not been so stubborn, I would have walked with north of 150K on that trade. But I was just lucky to be out alive. After that one was a big lesson for me.
It's always a bit of a dangerous situation when you end up getting rewarded for a bit of a stubborn and reckless trade, right?
I know. Yeah.
So what were your key takeaways from all of that?
It could have been a total disaster. I mean, I was so lucky, just pure luck getting bailed out on that. I mean, I saw some blocks getting swallowed up like at the lows. I saw like, I know 100. I ended up taking some screenshots of the trade, and I remember seeing the big blocks get swallowed up like at the very lows. I mean, there was like 150K block and another one for like 300. So I was like, I'm going back. I'm gonna, whatever buy power I have, I'm using it, and I'm jumping back in. My average was still shit, but I had like, we'll see what happens. And like I said, it squeezed, ripped through VWAP, and monster volume came in, just shot straight back up, and the company ended up getting bought out. ACXM, I think, got taken out like in the 40s, but that's why I love the swing trading. These things that get beat down, I mean, they come back pretty well. But that was not a good lesson to learn at that time, because more oftentimes than not, like that's they end in disaster. And I've taken some hits after that similarly, but that was a big lesson for me to slow down, wait for it to bottom out. And through these trades and trading the same setup over and over for the last couple of years, I've gotten better. I've gotten a lot better at waiting from the setup. I still make mistakes. I mean, sometimes they just don't go. Sometimes they reverse. Sometimes they don't. We saw Roku. I took a pretty nasty hit on Roku a couple months ago when it gapped down. I mean, I was trying to bounce that 3-4 days, and it just never rebounded and went from 48 to 45 and below 40, and we didn't see a reversal until the 30s. So sometimes these things just don't come back, and that's the importance of respecting the law to stop, and not getting too aggressive early. But again, it's something I've developed over time, and again, this is typically this is really the only thing I trade. Things that are gapping down. I mean, there's been days, like today, for example, you had asked me what I traded, and I didn't trade anything. We'd gapped up, the market started fading off. I can't see anything tradable there, so I didn't day trade anything.
So getting into a trade, what exactly are you looking for? Is it some kind of indicator cross? Is it a volume or a price action thing?
So again, I'm not using a lot of indicators, but what I'm mainly looking for is kind of initially the selling to get exhausted, more buyers coming in, the dips to hold. When I'm really in a trade and I'm really in pretty big, I'm kind of just glued in on the level 2, watching the big bidders coming in, and even if it's gotten a little bit away from me where I didn't want to add here, and I really see the momentum shifting on the level 2, I mean, I'm pressing it and I'm adding, and I'm going in as much as I can, because typically, again, doing this type of setup day in and day out, and generally this is all I'm really trading. I've really have gotten like a good feel of these things. But other times, as I'm trying to buy dips, I'll see the selling pressure come in on every pop, and dips are just not holding, and this thing start to roll over. But I still get caught, but I know better now to size down on these pops, and when I see the selling pressure coming in, I'm definitely sizing down. But it's never picture perfect. Sometimes they just rip way too fast, and I don't have enough size there, and then it gets too far away from me where I'm like, what I have is what I have, and I'll just dump that into the push. But it never works to the T. But I'm generally just looking to try to keep it as simple as possible. I have my key levels drawn out before, so I know if it crosses a certain point, well, it's going to go here. Then if we get to this point and hold this level, we're most likely going to go to the next spot. And from that and level 2, that's kind of all I'm really looking for.
So how do you size up into these names that you're trading?
So if it's day one, I'm never going full size, and especially if it's something I'm holding overnight, I make sure that I have plenty of room, and I'm wanting to get into 30,000-40,000 shares of something. I leave room for at least 3 ads, and if I'll add 3 times on that one. But if it's overnight and if it's the first day of the sell, I generally like to stay relatively light. The second day is where if it's the first red day and it's kind of bottomed out and tried to come back and failed a couple times through VWAP and didn't really get going, but you saw some support, I'll hold on to the initial starting position and some ads. And then the next day, if I get a gap down and wash out again into support, I'm really looking to add into that point for a follow through move. But if it gaps down and just rolls over, I'm quick to bail on that one, just because I know it's broken through yesterday's support. It's not going to hold. I'm out. And then if it gaps up and stuffs into prior resistance point, I'm just taking it off, just because it's most likely it's just going to roll over and fade off the rest of the day. So on the first day, I generally like to stay pretty light. I think Match was one of them I ended up holding for a couple days. I don't know if you remember earlier this year, MTCH got crushed on the Facebook news that they were coming out with some like dating feature, and Match just got hammered. And I was early on that one, but I saved some room, and that one came back right back to where I didn't hold it the entire way, but it had bottomed out, and then all the dips were holding into that, so I ended up holding that for I think 4 or 5 days. But something like that, like a news driven event, where I don't necessarily think it's going to impact the stock as much, but kind of overreaction, Earnings are a little bit tricky because, if it's bad earnings, these things can get some downgrades in it and you get a gap down and it could just continue to sell off. And that's a little bit more tricky stuff I don't really like to get too aggressive on. But again, it's assessing each news, each play differently.
That's really interesting. Tell us about a change that you've made that you feel like has really improved your trading results.
So I think one of the things I had really changed over the last couple of years that has helped me the most was, avoiding all the indicators and waiting for, when it crosses this certain point or when it holds this indicator, then I'll buy or sell, and just really focus on what was actually happening in the trade. Where the buyers, where the sellers, and ultimately it's the big money that moves the markets. So these thousands of hundreds of thousands of 100 share prints don't really mean anything, and it's just more of a distraction in my opinion. I'm looking for the big blocks, the big sells, the big buys, and that's why I'm so closely glued to level 2. And if it's something that trades a lot of volume, 20 30 million shares a day, I'll adjust my time and sales sheet to just show orders above 1,000 or maybe 2,000 shares to mute out a lot of that noise. Because as you're looking for these, I mean, there's so many prints going through, it's hard to keep in track, and one might slip in there and you don't see it. So I'll adjust accordingly. But really the big thing now is I'm looking for where that big buyer comes in, or where the essentially it creates support and resistance where there's a lot of supply or a lot of demand. And if a big buyer comes in and starts swallowing up the offers, and that's a pretty good indicator, better than anything, that the momentum is going to shift. Also on the opposite side of that is if you see these constant blocks getting sold and the bids just get chewed up, it's there's a seller in there. So that's really your best bet. Obviously there's a lot more that goes into it, and determining, looking at the graph, and I mean the chart, and going back on the intraday and the daily chart and seeing where it's failed. And it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to hold just because it's held before, or whatever indicator you're using. It doesn't mean it's gonna work. It's just you have to plan on that. And that's really the big thing that I've changed. Quiet all the other noise, and then just focus on the buyers and sellers and the big guys that are involved in the trades. And ultimately that's what's really helped me over the last couple of years.
So I know that you're a big advocate for a structured day and a strong morning routine. Tell us a bit about it.
I think the morning routine is by far one of the most important things. It's crucial, especially in what we do and the stress that we go through day in and day out. I mean, you look at athletes like Kobe Bryant and Tom Brady, and these guys don't just wake up, roll out of bed and brush their teeth and go out and play a football game or a basketball game. Like Kobe Bryant shows up 4 hours before a game and shoots 500 shots before any game starts. He's one of the first people there. He talks about like the usher being there, and you could hear the sound of the rim as he's shooting. And that's essentially what it takes. We as traders, we get an opportunity to trade every single day, and you've got to have a routine. And I'm so religious about mine and what I do, just because of the level of stress that this entails. So I usually start pretty early. I like working out in the mornings. So I'm in Dallas. Obviously, it's a central time zone here. So 8:30 the market opens. So I'm up at 4:30. Head to the gym at 5. From about 5 to 7, I'm at the gym. I come home, hot shower, then switch over and finish up with cold, and just really get my body just kind of in a shock state, just to really wake up. And I'll always incorporate something positive. I've got a list of reaffirmation, just something to kind of bring me up. And as I'm scanning the market, I'm always listening to something that's going to help me throughout the day. And I have a strict rule with anybody that knows me: no phone calls. Unless it's an emergency, don't call me before 12. My parents know that. My sister knows that. I mean, all my friends, like, strict rule, like no phone calls. My phone's on silent. So I'm, getting tuned in. Again, I mentioned I scan for ideas the night before. So I'm seeing what's going on in the morning. I know a lot of people are kind of iffy on this topic, and, it helps some, it helps others. But, I started meditation about a year and a half ago, like guided meditation. I do a quick 5 to 10 minute, nothing crazy, just to calm me down, because I intense workout and I want to get zoned in. And I have my list of songs I play just to kind of pump me back up. And when the market takes off, I do the same thing every single day. So I don't deviate from it. I'm extremely religious about it, and I think that's, it's such a crucial piece to trading. And I know Nate's always talked about that and in the videos too. And this is a professional job, and you got to treat it not like a hobby. I mean, take it as seriously as possible. So that's basically what my day looks like in the morning.
So was it as vigorous after the closing bell as well?
Most likely, I'm going straight to my couch to take a nap because I'm glued to the screen all day. I'm taking a nap and let things kind of settle out, and I wait for the news to happen after close, and then I'll start scanning again. 6, 7 o'clock when all the action post market action is done. So that's basically it. Make dinner, relax, and I'm in since I get up so early. I'm in bed by 9:30. I mean, I'm not sticking around going out at night, but I'm just getting ready for the next day.
I think everyone needs to balance out a crazy day with a little bit of time to unwind in the afternoon. So shifting gears a little, what part of trading do you feel like is your biggest weakness?
So to this day, I think my biggest challenge is taking losses. When a winning trade comes, I forget about it quick. Short-lived hype, make money, you move on and go to the next one. But loss is just I still to this day struggle so much, and especially early. Because I'm always planning on adding more. So if something is going against me, I have room to add, and sometimes I'm fighting things way longer than I should be. And I've learned my lesson not to jump in with size too quickly, but that doesn't mean I don't let stuff go against me. I let it happen all the time. I'm thinking, okay, well, if this thing it'll bounce at some point. I'll add on every washout, and then I'll get my average down, and I'll sell in the pop. And I bail myself out many times, but other times it just doesn't work. And I've gotten in a lot of trouble. It's something I could definitely work on the most, but it's definitely put me in some very tough situations. I mean, the biggest issue I had I could have walked away with the scenario I had with PDD. I mean, I've been in this thing now for 3-4 months, since about September, and I just refuse to be wrong. It failed to break out over 29.30 back in September. It slammed. I had a pretty decent chunk there at the time. I was up north of 150, 180K at the time, and I rode it to flat. And then what's even worse, I started adding again, and I kept adding. Being up that much, and then it going against you, then riding it to red, and then I don't know if any of you are familiar with the hit piece that came out, and it flushed out to like 16, and I was down close to 340, 350K on that, and I ended up having like a panic attack like midday while I was trading. When I saw that news came out and I saw the stock flush, I mean, typically when these things happen, the hit piece comes out, like that is the first move of like the next leg to the downside. So it had flushed to like 1650, and I was like, oh shit, like this thing's going to go 15, 12 before it even bases out. And I was already down 340K on that trade. I had taken like a couple big losses because of the market slamming back in October, November. So I was already down 500K realized. And then this trade, and it just, I mean, I went totally numb, like couldn't see, heart start racing, disoriented. It was the scariest thing I've ever been through in my entire life. I ended up driving myself to the hospital, like in panic mode. Got to the ER. I was like, I'm dying. I'm like, I don't know what's wrong with me. And they rushed me to get a CT scan. I had to do an EKG, and they're trying to calm me down. And it was like, it was the most frightening experience I've ever gone through. And this is because I just refused to be wrong. Like I could have gotten out and taken the loss early. So, riding it, being up almost 200K, riding it to flat, I could have taken a 50K loss, and then from that 50K loss went to 100, from 100 to 2, and then 2 to 3, and then potentially I was looking at another $500,000 loss on the trade. And it just, I mean, I lost it. And, that was one of the most frightening things I'd ever experienced. And, I ended up sticking with it. It came back, and I've been in this thing for, like I said, 3-4 months now. And it's coincidentally, we're doing the interview today where, this thing's had a huge day. I'm up huge on it. I've been locking in, which I didn't do last time it moved into 28, in the 28, 780, 28 and 8, and all these guys have been like, you need to sell some, lock some in. So I've been locking some in, and this has turned out to be at the moment my biggest win to date. But man, so much stress and fear could have been avoided had I just taken the loss. And that's one. I mean, this is relatively recent, so it's one thing I absolutely still struggle with. So definitely need some work in that area.
So, what do you do to handle a big realized loss?
So for me, walking away is the most important thing, and just getting away from the screens. Whatever the situation is, just get away, just clear my mind. I generally leave my house. I'm really close with my family, as I mentioned. My sister and my niece are here in Dallas with me, so I just I use my niece as my outlet. I mean, we're extremely close. I mean, I was there when she was born that first night, and we were just attached at the hip, and she just kind of helps erase all like the negative, and helps me get my mind off the markets. And she just wants to play, and always smiles with her. So that's kind of been my out. And I really think that I don't have any pets. I'm single. I'm 29. I'm not married, so I don't have like a significant other, or a pet to kind of help cheer me up. But I have this little girl who's just helps bring me up every single time. So I spend some time with her, get away from the screens at all costs, and she kind of helps cheer me up, and kind of reminds me of why I'm doing all this. So that's been a big one for me.
So, if you could go back in time 5 years, what would you tell yourself before you started on your trading journey?
So one of the things I would go back and tell myself when I just started is to not follow random alerts, not jump into stuff that I'm not familiar with. Have a plan, because what hurt me and still does to this day is jumping in and not having an exit plan. If it gets here, what do I do? I stop. If it gets to this point, I'll sell, or if it gets to this point, I'll buy. And I think the most important thing would be focusing on a single setup that works for me and that I'm comfortable with, and just sticking to that, and figuring out a way to make it work, and just trading that day in and day out, instead of always chasing stuff. And where I think when I started out, like the majority of time where I was losing money was I was chasing stocks I wasn't familiar with. I didn't know what they were. I didn't know how or why they were moving. That's what ultimately hurt me. And I was trading all over the place, 5, 6, 7 stocks a day. And I'm not Nate. Like, he's a human algorithm. I can't do that. I mean, I find my 2, 3, and those are the ones I focus on. I wish when I started, I just said to myself, like, this is your 1 or 2 trades. Wait for this setup. Just trade this, instead of being all over the place. And I think that's one of the most important things I would tell myself.
Very cool. So, similar question, but a little different. What pieces of advice do you think new traders need to understand and know before coming into the world of trading?
So one of the biggest pieces of advice I think new traders should start with is to trade small, but trade consistent. Take the size down when you're early, and just be involved every single day, and really pay attention to how these stocks move. And over time, you become familiar with certain names. Like, if MU's been my go-to. Whenever I see something moving with MU, like, I know how this thing trades. I've traded it 1,000 times, and I'm very comfortable taking. I know the stock, the background of it. And if you're over time, you develop your go-to plays, or whether it's an oil name, and whether it's a semi, or whatever biotech that you like. And the key is being involved every single day, like getting that screen time. Because if you trade today and then not again for a couple of weeks, well, the market changes it every single day. I mean, we've seen it in the last couple of months, and even now in the last couple of weeks, we've rallied so much off the lows, and the market's acting completely different how it was a couple months ago. I mean, even the down days, selling hasn't been that bad. I mean, just being involved and seeing what the market's doing every single day, like whether it's, if you're trading 100 shares or 1,000 or 10,000 or whatever, just stick with it. Ultimately, you will figure it out. It just takes time. And I know it sucks when you're starting out, because nothing seems to be going well and you can't find any consistency. But, I'd started out, I told you one of my first wins was like $82, and I'd lost thousands of dollars up until then. And my goal was to make $1,000 a day. And when I got to that, then it was like, I'll make 2,000 and 5 and then 10. And I kept going. And, but I started with very, very small wins. And what kept me going was I never walked away from trading. I kept trading as much as I could. I mean, there's obviously days where just life happens and you just can't. But, 90% of the time, 95% of the time since I started trading, I've traded. So that's the best piece of advice that I can give the new guys coming in and starting out. Just stick with it, be consistent, find your niche, find what works for you, and keep hammering at it because it will come together. I guarantee you it will come together if you stick with it.
Some really solid advice for newer traders right there. So how about guys who have been in the game for a little while and looking to step up what they're doing?
This is a tough one because, as an experienced trader, you're always looking to level up and, as much as you don't want to compete with another guy or whatever somebody else is doing in the room, you're in competition with yourself. And, you always want to improve. And it sucks that we are this way because you could make 10 or 20 grand in a day and you left another 5 or 10 on the table and you're still upset. So you could do well, but it's never good enough. So, I struggle with it. I'm sure a lot of guys do. And I think what I'm trying to do or have been recently is just take more enjoyment in this opportunity, this life that we have and being able to trade. And it's really, for me, it's such a neat thing. And I'm obsessed with it. I love it. I love every minute of it and just enjoying the process and not so much the end result. Because if your, destination is C and if A and B clicks and you get there and it's like a cause and effect relationship. If this happens, if I make 5K, then I'm going to be happy. And if I don't, I won't. So that's a big one that I've tried to work on. Just try to find some fulfillment in like the day-to-day process and not so much the end result.
P-Mill's spitting some knowledge for everyone, right? So you've been in Investors Underground for some time now. What is it that you get out of the community?
When I started, again, it was just somebody that actually gave out a plan. Nate does a phenomenal job of saying, if this happens, then this is what I'm looking for. This is the key level. And he's warning guys. And it's not just like an alert room. And for me, it's, having that experience with surrounded by guys who've been in the markets for such a long time. And, the guys that have been around for a while know like nothing trumps experience. I mean, the screen time is one of the most important things you could get. So you have guys in a room who've, 20, 30 years experience and who've just been trading day in and day out and nothing, you just can't replace that, and I love being, around the guys who are like, hey, watch out for this or warning new guys and, be careful with this. And that, I mean, that's just, it's really hard to find. And that's why I've never left, so it's just the quality of the guys in the room is irreplaceable.
So in the past, I had noticed that you were a little more under the radar in the IU chat room, but recently you've been posting more and kind of coming out of your shell a little. Do you care to shine a little light on that a bit?
For the longest time, I was such a lone wolf, and I realized that was not the way to go. I didn't have really many trading friends, and you can't tell a friend who doesn't understand trading that, hey, I just lost 30 grand today. Like, it's just people just don't understand. Like, I should have branched out when I was just starting out. And I think that's one thing if I could go back, I would do a lot sooner and try to reach out to some guys and like connect with people and not wait, until being a couple years in. But, I'm really good friends with Josh and, it grows so naturally or so organically because, you have so much in common with the guys who are in this room. And it's crazy to me that, I'm still kind of like upset at myself that I didn't reach out to people sooner, but I just had a lot going on, like work, family stuff, and I always just kept to myself. But in the last couple of years, I've really started to branch out, and I'm really regretting I didn't do it sooner. But now it's such a cool thing because we're so close. You spend all day with these guys and in the room and talking to them, and it's such a neat experience. So I've become such good friends with a number of guys in the room, and it's been pretty awesome.
So looking in the short to medium term, what do you think we're going to be seeing from P-Mill in the future?
So just continue to look for the buy side trades. I mean, I do a significant amount of prep work on the weekends. Again, like I'm scanning the markets, stuff that's oversold, like just beat to hell, over the last week or 2 weeks, just waiting for stuff to bottom out. So Just keep an eye out for the same stuff. Oversold plays off the bottom, and if you see some gapping down, I'm most likely going to be taking that at some point. So yeah,
And what do we think we're going to be seeing from you in the long term?
I think I'm going to be 80 years old and still trading. I mean, there isn't a thing in the world that I could see myself, envision myself doing. Probably be in my wheelchair at some computer at 80 years old. I'm in it for life. So catch me in my 80s.
So I think this is the longest interview we've ever done with an IU member, and it's definitely one of my favorites for sure. It's been a real great insight into the mind of a trader who is happy to risk it for the biscuit, as we would say in Australia. I've really enjoyed the opportunity to get to know a bit more about you as a person and also your trading style, and the feedback that you've given about the IU community has really reinforced to all the staff here that we're on the right track and making sure that members are getting value for their subscription. So if anyone wants to reach out to you, what's the best way to do so?
So I'm P_Mill in chat, and P_Milak on Twitter. Feel free to reach out anytime. I'm more than open to answering questions. So I don't know everything. I don't pretend to. I'll give you an honest answer based off of what I currently know. But definitely, if anybody's any questions on the buy side